The two question words, why and how, strangely enough, they're the two which, when you try and build expert systems and you want the damn thing to explain something to you, then they are the ones that we can do. How and why have their own kind of motor behind them.
Welcome back to another episode. I am so excited today for this particular episode because I have a wonderful colleague and friend, and she is coming to me from all the way across the ocean. Okay. This is a person who I came to know working with through the course. You all know I have this course, this Communication That Transforms course, and she is my learning management system partner. And she authors a few of the SCORM units in the module, as well as we have been partnered. She helps me make all of this work. So when I work with organizations and I am, delivering, she's one of the brains behind not only the tech, but a little bit of the content as well. So, and the quizzes, how it runs all smoothly and the flow. And we've become quite good friends in the process because we've been working together for, I think it's been 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer. So I would love to welcome Dr. Conor Hughes. She is a partner in CR Squared, but she is also a human catalyst, and she helps people make the changes in their life and in their world that they want. And so today we're going to be talking about, she's also an NLP trained practitioner, master practitioner. And so that was another way that we connected, and why we work so well together. And we were talking one day, and she made a statement about the W questions. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But it led to me saying, you know what, I have got to have you on this podcast to talk about what's behind our questions and the assumptions that come up in our questioning. So welcome, Connor, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you. How are you today?
I am very well, thank you. It is day 3 of spring over here in South Africa. So everything's just blossoming and great. Life's good.
Awesome. So I would love for my audience to get to know you a little bit better. And so I would love you to just share a little about who you are, what you do, and kind of how you've come to do what you do.
Thanks, Masha. Let's focus on the question stuff. When I did my PhD way back in another century, my thesis was actually called Question Answering for the Generation of Explanation in Knowledge-Based Systems. Now that's an aspect of artificial intelligence. It came out of building engineering knowledge-based systems, expert systems for Unilever research. So I was very heavily involved in understanding what questions did and all the rest of it. And as time went on, my interests moved kind of away from IT and strict artificial intelligence. And I started to wonder, how does the brain do this? Because that's what old AI, the stuff I used, which was all about can we build models to show us ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we typically mean by AI nowadays, but
Right.
that's what it is. And what I started to think is, if we know this about how the brain works and we can model it on a computer, which is AI, what if we take the same information and we start to think about how we can help people with it? So I moved very much away from the whole engineering and IT thing, but took all of those ideas and moved into, how do I help people? How do I coach? How do I coach with what Robert Dilts called with a capital C?
Yes.
It's not a one note coaching. It's coaching. Maybe you're coaching the identity. Maybe you're just coaching it at a behavior and an environmental level. But the key thing that I've always believed is that the questions we ask are the keys that unlock the ability of people to grow. And to me, the issue is never about the answers. The answers are the least interesting thing that happens when you ask a question. And what I came
Yes.
to understand based right back in my PhD work is we have to understand the process in the brain
Mm.
that happens when you are asked a question, because there are an awful lot of therapeutic questions. I'm going off now into this isn't me, but we'll talk about. But therapeutic questions are easily misused. If you don't know
Yes.
what you're doing, you can
Yes.
actually accidentally invoke the wrong circuits. So
That's
that
right.
come through in the last, I hate to think, 40 years. That's how long I've been at this. So
Yeah.
questions are a huge part of the way I see the world. And you mentioned that we've worked together on developing interactive quizzes
Yes.
for amazing trauma-informed communication stuff, which is fabulous. Go check it out. The the nature of those, what I see when I look at a quiz, an interactive quiz online,
Mhm.
is not what other people see, because I'm understanding what's going to happen in the brain. And that's
Right.
what today is when we create a question with an intent, how do we know that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot with
Mhm.
a misconstruction
Right.
question? So that's really what I would like to bring all that history to today, to say, how can we as coaches and therapists and change makers, you said catalyst, absolutely. As catalysts, how do we catalyze the thought processes with our questions? And if we don't
Yes.
get an answer, yes.
Yes.
Clients like giving answers, and I always look very impressed when they give me answers, but I'm watching their skin tone, I'm watching their facial expressions, and that tells me whether my question has done its job. It's a cherry on the cake. Yeah.
I love that. I think it's so powerful. So many things that you've said. And one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about your transition from sort of the engineering and AI into more of the human engineering, if you will, and
Yeah.
the brain is the similarity. There is a lot of similarity between the brain circuitry, how the brain works and how a computer works. There's a
Absolutely.
lot of, crossover metaphor in
Yep.
that. And so it makes sense, the transition, And the other thing that occurred to me is as you talked about, like, if you ask the wrong question, it might activate unintentionally a circuitry that you weren't intending to activate. And it made me think of this idea of how, we form pictures in the brain. Like, we form pictures before we form words. So we form the pictures and then we encode them into words, and then we speak, and then another person forms pictures and they encode them into words. And so as we ask questions, what picture is forming in the
Yeah.
brain? And so that's what it brought up for me. And so I'd love for you to take us even a little bit deeper on this questioning and the assumptions that can show up. And even, if there's something before or something after that, I might be diving right in the middle. So take it away.
Okay. Let's just let's look at a question first, because if we don't know what we're dealing with when we talk about questions, then it's hard to talk about what goes on in the brain.
That's right.
So when we construct a question, what we're actually doing is we are presenting the person let's call them the answerer for the sake of argument. No, that's too
Right.
long. I'll never get that straight. The client. Just for, it's not a great word, but let's do client. When we construct the question for a client, what we have to do is we're painting a little picture. You can ask a question just with your eyebrows, right? Somebody said something and you go, that's a question. But it isn't a question in the sense that I want to talk about the language of the question.
Mm-hmm.
The question itself has to paint the picture, and there is a piece missing usually. Okay, that's how most of us view questions. So you stand at the butchery counter in your local supermarket, and you look at this great piece of whatever, and you say, "How much is that steak, please?" Okay, that's a really simple example. That means that the person you're talking to is not a client in this case, but the person you're talking to needs to know, what are we talking about at all? What's the subject of this? And
Mm-hmm.
that's how we usually think about this. I'm saying there is a stake here. Can you see the stake? Yes, you can see the stake. Good. So we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
We agree that this is a shop. None of this gets said, but this is what's going on in this weird little internal representation in our minds.
Mm,
We know we're in a shop, so that thing is for sale. Right.
mhm.
If something's for sale, it's got a price. So I know it's got a price. You know it's got a price. I don't know the price, but I'm betting you know the price. I've got to paint that picture, and the price is probably the last thing that comes in.
You're right.
A lot
That's
of it
so
comes from
interesting.
I'm standing in front of the butchery counter. So, hey, I'm not going to be asking you, do you know the capital of Tibet? It's
No.
probably going to happen. You know, there's an awful lot contextually I don't need to say, but it's going
Mhm.
to light up correctly in the brain.
Mhm.
So we've painted a picture, and the other thing we now need to tell the other person is what's the piece of information that we don't have but we'd like.
Mhm.
So my question is, what's the price? How much does it cost? That's the standard way of that's a non-therapeutic question.
Mhm.
So we've got the internal representation that we've got to have in the brain, and
Mhm.
then we have the this bit of it's the price I'm interested in.
Mhm.
Every question pulls apart into two chunks like that. It pulls apart into the things that we have to agree are happening. We're in a shop
Mhm.
for sale. It will have a price, blah, blah, blah. So we have to agree on that. And then I'm going to tell you price. I might say, which farm did it come from?
Mhm.
Different question. But it's still the same context. But now we've introduced the idea that's probably, it came from a farm some and so on.
Right.
So we've got the IR, if you don't mind, I'm going to call it the IR, the internal representation that's been lit up, the neural excitations in the brain. I'm going to call
Mhm.
the representation of what it is we're talking about. From there, we need the question plugged in. Ordinary ones, it's like a database lookup. In fact, that's how databases originated. I actually studied under the guy who was one of the founders of relational databases many years ago.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was a real eye opener about questions. We'd never used
Mhm.
to ask that. We couldn't ask questions of great stuff on a computer. We had to invent that. So it was kind of, oh, okay, you're asking a question there, aren't you? And the computer has an answer it looks up. Okay.
Mm.
So those question pieces, apart from the IR, we usually talk about the 7 question words, the WH questions.
Mhm.
Where? This is when an English accent is actually quite handy because we do actually need to pronounce it. Um, it's what, where, who, except we don't pronounce it there, when, and they actually tell you, these little ones tell you what it is they're looking for. When it's going to be about time.
It's interesting, right? So what just happened for those who are listening is I did a thing with my eyes and my eyebrows, and Connor picked it up immediately that I wanted to say something. So as she was saying earlier, and those who are looking at this on at a video, pause, rewind, and look again. And so what I heard you saying, well, first I'll just allude to what I just said, is it speaks to the nonverbal language that can happen, and especially when two people are tuned in to each other, how that serves as communication. Coming back to what you were saying, is it sounds to me like, just to kind of like chunk it up, big picture it for the listeners, is that when you ask a question, there are so many understandings that are usually are already there inside of the question, like assumptions that we're making before we even ask the question. And I want to not transition, but chunk this laterally, chunk this over to leadership for just a moment. Because
Mhm.
when you think about being in an organization and having, say, like a supervisor and a direct report, or being in a clinic and having a doctor and a patient, and the doctor asking the patient a question, or the patient asking the doctor a question, or a project being given and the leader asking, can you do this? Or if the direct report asking, what do I need in order to blah, blah, blah. There are so many understandings that are not spoken that have to be in place that we are often unaware of when we ask the question. And that is the reason why this is so important to really get and understand. So that's I just wanted to like sort of insert that in that relevance. People this is very interesting, but people, y'all got to get that this is very applicable in every area of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk about those W questions because I'm real interested.
Let's move across to the therapeutic approach.
Hmm.
I talk about therapeutic because that's how I tend to use it.
Hmm.
But when we work in corporates, I've spent a lot of years working in corporates. When we work in corporates, we often go down paths that we don't realize we're setting ourselves up for. And we do it by asking not the wrong questions. There is no wrong question. You'll always get something, but what you get may not be what you wanted. It may not take you to a useful place. So,
Hmm.
for example, again, therapeutic questions. I've spoken to therapists and we talked about questions that we use. I won't talk about my pet hate one. We'll do that later. But questions like, how often do you feel depressed? How would you assess the depth of your depression today? Or so, and people actually ask those kind of questions. In order to answer a question, you have to accept the representation that's built into it. That steak has a cost. If it hasn't got a cost, you can't answer the question. You can say things like, no, today they're all for free. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, but if you reject the assumption built into it, you don't ever get to answer the question. So
Hmm.
if you're going to answer the question, what your brain has to do is it has to accept that assumption. Yeah, it has to go, yeah, we're in a shop, we're buying a steak. Therapeutically, the client has to accept, I feel depressed, and you're asking me how deep it is. Okay, so that's a how question. I'll come back to
Hmm.
your things in a bit. In accepting the idea that the topic is the depth of your depression,
Hmm.
the circuits you have to light up are those that examine the feeling. They take you back into stored memories
Hmm.
and you have to visit it and re-feel it.
Hmm.
You don't have a little dial that says, oh, it was a 3 on that day and it was a 7. You have to go into the memory, re-experience the depression, and then assess it. If you think about what that lights up, you are lighting up some circuits that have got some real pain in them.
Hmm.
Okay? Now, if that's what you're trying to do, that's great. If you're trying to get the person to associate back in to the stuff they're trying to get rid of, you're going to do that. The reason that happens is because memories aren't stored as objects in the brain. We have to, don't forget, when we ask questions, we're usually working on, it sounds crazy to call it memory, but it is. How much is that steak? Well, unless they've got absolutely no idea and have to go and look at the price tag, they know how much the steak is. They have remembered it. So
Hmm.
every memory every question is going to have a memory attached that's being questioned. When we remember something, they're not little bits of memory like a computer. What we do is we use the same neurons, and I don't mean the same kind of neuron, I mean the same neurons to store as things are happening, the neurons that we use to see and hear and feel and taste and smell, those are the neurons that store the memory. Okay. And when you want to retrieve the memory, you have to go and poke those neurons and you will feel the way you felt. Now, that can be extremely counterproductive in a therapeutic situation. It may be exactly what you mean to do, but if you don't know that that's what your question does, It takes you straight back into whatever the questioner is pointing at.
Mhm.
You accept, I have been depressed. How depressed? Oh, I don't know. Was it worse? Was it worse 6 months ago than it is now? Okay, now I've got two areas of depression that I'm going to compare. When we use our neurons, we make those paths stronger. Every time I ask somebody to go back in to a really unpleasant memory, unless I'm managing it some other way, I am strengthening their ability to get at that bad memory.
Yeah, yeah. So this is really interesting because, one of the things that I talk a lot about, as you know, is trauma,
Mm.
and it speaks to re-traumatization. And
Absolutely.
so, I think it's important to recognize this because the more we are, there's a book, Dr. John Vanderbeek, I think, the body keeps a score. And so what you're speaking to is this space of, the when if we have trauma stored in the body, if we have negative emotions stored in the body,
Yep.
and we're asked to relive, we're
Mm.
asked to jump back in and relive that, what can happen in relighting those pathways over and over is re-traumatization.
Yes.
And so it's important to recognize that in how we are asking the questions that we ask. And I'll say this because I know we're talking about questions, and I'll say this. I think it's also important to recognize this in general in the words that we speak. So we talk about, when we talk about trauma in general, we don't use the word trigger. We use the word activation because it's actually more accurate, but also trigger has a violent connotation to it. And so it's like, what are the neural pathways that it's lighting up,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's what I hear you saying in regards to, these question words, is that in a therapeutic setting specifically, as we talk about it, you could end up taking a person back to a place emotionally that lights up these very painful networks or memories and causes some re-traumatization in the body.
That's right. The question words themselves, the little ones, the when, the who, the where, the what, they don't actually bring an awful lot of therapeutic value usually. What
Mhm,
usually happens in therapeutic settings is that the assumption that you have plugged into the context and the IR you're trying to create, you want that's what's doing what I would call the heavy lifting.
mhm,
So that's where therapeutically you can get an amazing amount done by getting the circuits lit up. So if I know that somebody, you'll know this example because you and I have worked with it in one of the units. But if somebody says, I always at work, I always feel like a complete fraud. I'm just, it's imposter syndrome. I
mhm,
feel like they're going to find out sooner or later. They're going to find out I
mhm,
don't know anything. Um,
mhm,
when we work with somebody like that, you can use these little words and say, and what would happen if you realized that you weren't an imposter? What would happen if you just, you know, realized there was a time when you were completely competent?
mhm.
In order to answer that, the person has to bring up something in them that says, let me look for times when I was completely competent. And
Right.
because they've accepted that's a valid idea. Question. Get the question. There were times when you have been completely competent.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they may never have thought that before, but they've
Mhm,
accepted that it's on. I'm going to answer that one. I can make that work. I believe that enough to answer the question.
mhm,
They're going to light up circuits that reinforce that. So the
mhm,
when, do I care whether it was last January or 3 years ago or last week? No. Am I particularly interested in when? No. What I want to do is I want to get them to think about times when that happened.
right.
And the problem with saying, were there any times that when that happened? That's a question, but it's a yes, no question.
Mhm,
We don't do them. Well, we do actually. We do to shut things down and move on. They have their own role.
they
Let's
have
not
their role.
they have their role. But they don't have the kind of therapeutic role because it's so easy to say, no, there's never been any time. If you ask when, in order to even contemplate answering the question, they have to buy the idea that the answer's there somewhere,
Yeah.
and they go
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah.
So we've like lit up the pathways. They may come back and say, "Yeah, actually, you'll usually get this. Actually, that there was a time, and I'm thinking, yeah, and in that situation, and suddenly they've never thought these thoughts before, but
Right.
just buying into that assumption that we've plugged into.
Right.
And it
Right.
sounds like an innocent question. When have you?
Right. Or
Hmm.
what would happen if I got to put a plug in for our cousin Hal,
Or
because even
how
though it doesn't, I mean,
like,
it doesn't have a, it's not a wha, it's not a wha, but I
it's
have to put a plug in for Hal because, if you're in the room and you're brainstorming, and or if there's and you've come to an impasse, or if you're working with a client, or you're working with a direct report that's sort of stuck, or if you're in a conflict, how can we make this work?
yeah,
How can we,
I
or what is the workaround? Another W. What is the workaround to this
yeah,
problem? It
I love it.
puts in the assumption, just as you said, that
Yeah.
there is a workaround, or
Mhm.
that we can make it work. And the
Right.
picture that comes up in the person's mind begins to move towards the solution rather than being stuck in the problem. Why is this happening? Or what's the problem? Right. So that it's like, I think
Absolutely.
it's such a great when you say, the assumption, the person has to go and look for the assumption of there was a time, or we can make it work. And so
Yeah.
that I think that's a very cool thing for people to recognize is how you use the what questions and the how question is so critical. The key is thinking about how do you put the solution picture, or the open the conversation with these words rather than close the conversation or continue to dwell in the problem.
Yeah. The, the two question words why and how. Strangely enough, they're the two which, when you try and build expert systems and you want the damn thing to explain something to you, then they are the ones that we can do, believe it or not, in an expert system. And they are the two most powerful. The
Mhm.
other questions have to use, they can only use their assumptions in order to really get some change going, to get people to think things they've never thought before.
Mhm.
How and why have their own kind of motor behind them. They
Ooh.
they are much, they're a league. They're the, they're the big boys,
You
of
know,
the question world.
you've got me thinking,
Completely
Connor.
vanilla. Mhm.
You've got me thinking. Would you be interested in doing a whole segment on just the how and the why?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Because
because
they're magic. They are
yeah.
absolutely. They are two different time machines. That's what how
Mhm.
one
Mhm.
takes you to the future, and one takes you right into the past. And if you don't want to go to the past, do not ask why.
Okay. So we've said it here on the air here. What we are doing is part one with the
Yeah,
what and the when
absolutely.
and the
Absolutely.
where. And
Yeah.
we are going to come back and we're going to focus on the why and the how, because I think those are two very powerful things to dig deep in.
Yeah.
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 I really love this conversation. And, Connor, you and I can talk all day about this.
Mhm.
And I know we have just touched the
One
tip
We have
iceberg.
one thing I would like to say, because you were talking before about being aware of the other person's non-linguistic communication, the
Hmm.
body language. I heard it called
Hmm.
body parl the other day, which I really like. Apparently, that's an old term. I met it accidentally. But one of the things that I would say is that when you're working therapeutically with a question, you've hit the jackpot when the person who's being asked your therapeutic question just stops in their tracks, and their face will change, their skin tone will change, their posture,
Hmm.
so much will change, and it's unconscious. It's not a conscious movement.
Hmm.
When you see that, you know that you've got some kind of change. You don't know what it is, but as
Hmm.
a therapist, you know you've hit a really rich vein of something.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important when we work with questions that we don't take too much notice of the words that come back to us, but
Right.
we really must. We use the language to provoke the brain. The
Mhm.
brain, because the representation changes, then the body will change.
Yeah.
And that's where your true answer lies. And I
Yeah.
think that one of the huge lessons for me when I started working therapeutically was no matter what people said, I would watch for the response, the physiological response to a question. And it
Yeah.
takes time. Sometimes it's fast, but mostly it's a kind of, and you'll see the eyes move as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
We call that, there's a word for that, it's called transderivational search. And
Yeah.
you know, they're looking for an answer, not that steak costs $4,
Yeah.
but the kind of, a real shift in their brains. The
Yeah.
huge coming together of body language and linguistics when we talk
Yes.
question answering.
So
Just
important. And I wanna like expand that just a little bit too, from the standpoint of, it's valuable in the therapeutic setting, but it's
yes,
also very valuable in the leadership setting
much.
because as a leader, and I've done a lot of like work and coaching with like chief medical officers and other C-suite leaders, CEOs. And one of the things that when I'm sort of helping them to interact or coach their direct reports, their managers and whatnot. When you're coaching your leaders, if you're a higher level leader and you're coaching your leaders, that question, asking the looking for the search, that transderivational search, that's what transderivational search, that's what you said, right?
Big words.
the, the wheels turning. That's
Yeah.
that's how the
Yeah,
wheels
it's going, the wheels are turning. Absolutely.
wheels are turning, looking for the wheels turning. So
Yeah.
when you ask the right questions, you elicit in your person a deeper search, which is so valuable in developing them as a leader and as an expanded thinker, as a deep thinker, and helping them to come up with solutions on their own rather than a lot of times in leadership, it's like we tell them
Yeah.
what to do. But if
Yeah.
you want to empower an emerging leader, you want to ask the right questions to
Yeah.
get them thinking about the solutions and expand their capacity. That's what expands the capacity for leadership. So I just wanted to like bring that in because I think like it's so important in a therapeutic setting and when I think some people listen, they might think, oh, well, I'm not in the therapeutic setting. But if you take this and you map this onto your leadership, if you map this onto your clinical practice, if you map this on to whatever industry that you're in, you will find that when you're interacting with people, you can empower them much more holistically when you ask the right questions, pay attention to the picture that you're forming in their brain and watch for the wheels to start to turn.
One last thought there. The leadership thing has its mirror image. I've done a lot of work in the mentorship space, and one of the things that I always say to my mentees is you have to learn to ask questions. As a mentor, I'm a leader in some ways, but
Mhm.
your job is to find out what I know that is useful to you.
Yeah.
It's not my job to produce a syllabus full of teaching. That's not what a
Mhm.
mentor does. But
Right.
if you can learn to ask the questions, one of the things that I worked on after I stopped being an academic and went into corporate, and we were building knowledge-based systems. To build a knowledge-based system, we had to go and sit with experts, and it's the word elicit that's
Mm.
brought this to my mind. We had to elicit knowledge that they did not consciously have.
Right.
It's a fascinating, absolutely fascinating subject. Um,
Mhm.
how do you ask an expert how they got to the answer when
Mhm.
they don't know, they can't
You don't
tell you.
always know. Right.
But if you have the right languaging and questioning skills, they can discover how they do what they do.
That's
And
right.
if you want to work towards a leadership role in a corporate, that is a brilliant capability to have, to be able to
Mm,
somebody and find out how they do what they do, even though they can't tell you. When you start, they
right.
haven't got it's
And
unconscious competence.
yes, I love that. And it's a great thing to explore as a leader in yourself. Like, how did you get to where you got to? How did you come to know the things that you know? How did you come to that unconscious competence? And so I think this is a great place to pause and put a pin in because I think, we're going to get into that why and that how the next time, which I can't wait to do that because I just know it's going to be rich, rich, rich.
It is.
And kind of, I just appreciate all of the knowledge and that you brought today and like exploration that you brought today with just the three questions that we've explored and for giving us a primer on what questions really are so people can understand a little bit more deeply what's happening when they ask a question and when they're being asked a question as well. I think those are great awarenesses to have. So I appreciate you so much.
If we do in another session, I think let's focus far more on leadership. I focused on therapeutic because that's really where a lot of my work's happened. But it'd be
Mhm,
really exciting to explore how both sides of the leadership conversation
mhm,
can both benefit from learning what does because how gets you so much on
mhm,
both sides of that.
mhm.
That would be very exciting. I'd love to do that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I would love for you to tell the audience if they want to follow, engage with you, invite you to speak, coach, whatever the case may be. If they want to work with you or engage with you, how do they do that?
They can get to me through our website, which is www.crsquared.co.za. We're in South Africa. I do work internationally. That's the easiest way to get to me. So that would be great.
Excellent, excellent. And we will have all of that in the show notes. Are you on any social media platforms that we might follow you on?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I will send you. I will give you the thing to include on that to get directly. I do use Facebook, but I use it for personal things. So if you're interested in doing non-linguistic therapeutic work with dogs and other somatic therapies, give me a shout because and then you need me on Facebook, but not. But again,
Very cool.
yeah, it's the same stuff. It's just applied to
Yeah.
animals. So
Yes, very
animals
cool.
animals work very like we do. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you talk
Ooh,
about that?
very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much,
Great pleasure.
Connor, for being with us today. I really appreciate. I can't wait till part two. We really will. We'll schedule that.
Yeah.
And to my audience, I always like to thank the audience because without the audience, there is no podcast. So I encourage you to listen. This is one that was very, very rich. You may need to listen to it again. And I encourage you to do that so that you can really take in and let it sink in and begin to apply some of these principles that we talked about today. And I invite you to share this with a friend, a colleague, a family member, a therapist, so that we can begin to ripple this information out into the community. And finally, if you would, I'd be so grateful if you left us a review because I really want our new listeners that are coming on every single day to recognize and to know that the information and the conversations that we have are of high value and are of application in their lives. So thank you again, Connor, for being with us.
Great
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Congrats.
Yes, yes. And thank you to our listeners for being with us. And until the next time we see each other, you all stay empowered.